Trackside tales, insider advice, lessons from the paddock. Find it all here on the Sector 1 Motorsport podcast in partnership with Formula Careers. Hello and welcome to the Sector 1 Motorsport podcast in partnership with Formula Careers. Now, on today's episode, I am joined by a driver coach whose job is to help those drivers perfect their techniques so they can get themselves towards the front of the grid. With his engineering background, he uses his expertise to aid Formula drivers. Now, please welcome Martin Villari. Martin, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. That's probably one of the best introductions I've had on a podcast. Very well done. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to sharing or telling you whatever you want to know.
So I know I've given you an introduction there, but it's always great to hear you kind of explain who you are, what you do in your own words. So would you be able to introduce yourself for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's Martin. I got an engineering background, like you said. As you say, I do work with the drivers on the technical side, leaning slightly towards mental side as well if we need to. I always say there's two areas in which I can help. There's the lap time, and that's understanding your telemetry, making sure we're taking the right line, managing wet situations, finding the grip, taking the car set up in a direction you want to go, and taking technical corners with the right technique as well. So that's lap time. But then there's conversion. And conversion is a whole other world. How do you convert that lap time into race wins and championships? So please see Lando Norris as your exhibit A. How do you convert that lap time into race wins? So that's start, attack, defense, fuel strategy, tire strategy, mental mindset, concentration, attention span, everything that surrounds the sport. So you might recall Lando leading in Singapore by a country mile and then having a few brushes with the ball. So what is that? Is that mindset? Is that concentration? Drops in attention span? What is that exactly? So those are the areas, depending on what level you're at. Like with Oscar, for example, it would be lap time focus. With Lando, for example, it would be conversion focus. So it just depends on where the driver's at and what specific help they need. But that's the overview.
Well, we'll get even more into that. We'll do a deep dive into that later on. But I'd like to know, where did that passion for motorsport begin? How did motorsport come to be a thing in your life?
Yeah, that's a good question. I haven't been asked before. So I'm born in Australia, in Sydney, Australia. My grandparents were all from Italy, and you guessed it, young Italian boy in an Italian family. My grandfather on my dad's side was always a Formula One fanatic. He sent to my brother a bunch of race tapes, race recordings at that time of every Australian Grand Prix back to Adelaide days. And my brother watched them all. He kind of took to it a little bit more than me because we were very young at this age. But then I started to like it from all standpoints, from the technical standpoint, the performance standpoint, financial standpoint, exclusivity, the skill, the talent, from every standpoint. I just the fitness required, like every little the details and the professionalism in the sport was something that I was really attracted to. So that's was kind of my introduction to motorsport, was watching every Australian Grand Prix with my brother back to the Adelaide days.
And when you were watching these races, did you ever have the inkling that you would want to work in motorsport, or did that come along a lot later?
It came a lot later with more consciousness and more awareness. And then as I became an engineer myself, then I always thought, maybe I could do this. It actually stemmed from watching some of the races and thinking, they're good, but they're not that good. There's some areas they can improve. I mean, you only need to look at McLaren's previous race where they didn't ask Lando to give that place back when it's clear in the rules. If you overtake off the track, you need to give that place back. So I look at the races and I think I can add value there. There's something in there for me. There's a role in there for me somewhere. So it was probably that building up over time, thinking, yeah, for sure, I can add and help out. But then the challenging part, which probably everyone gets to at one point, is what is that role? Is it mechanical engineer, strategy engineer, vehicle dynamics, performance engineer, trainer, physio coach, or marketing, or else, or otherwise? So I think that took me probably the most time. I'm happy where I've landed now. I feel like I'm doing really well. All the drivers I'm working with, I'm helping, and I'm adding value on the social medias like the YouTubes and and the TikToks and the Instagram worlds as well. So happy with where I landed, and hopefully stays that way.
And all of your knowledge, this knowledge that you're trying to teach others, where did you learn that? Was that at university with a mixture of just watching races? Well, where did you kind of get that understanding from?
Honestly, it's just experience and having a background in sim racing myself as well. If I could give you an example, I'll be watching a qualifying session. I don't know, let's say it's Suzuka, with my girlfriend, and the TV camera will cut to a shot of someone in the wall at spoon curve. And before we know what's happened, I'll say to my girlfriend, for sure he's put the right rear on the grass on the entry to spoon, for example. And then she's like, "Are you sure? How do you know?" I'm like, "Trust me." So then they cut to the replay of the car. Sure enough, on the entry, right rear on the grass in the wall. And she goes, "How do you know that?" And I say, "Well, that's the only way you can end up in that wall at that angle in that way." She's like, "How do you know?" I was like, "Well, it's happened to me a few times in the sim as well." Like, so it's just a combination of experiences and understanding. I think a lot of people would have that experience, but I think something I can do really well is learn. I will not make the same mistake twice. I don't need to see the same thing twice in order for it to stick. So, for example, Lando's lost the lead, I think 7 or 8 times this year off the start. He's qualified on pole and hasn't made it around the first lap in the lead. So that's when it's like, how many times does it take before you learn? So it's always, as we're all human, we all make mistakes. Once is fine, twice is starting to become, for me at least, like you're not paying attention. So yeah, a lot of sim work, a lot of work with drivers as well, a lot of paying attention to the details, a lot of research as well on my own. I have some research papers, which talk about short corners and tight lines and which is better in which type of corner for tire life or for overall lap time. So a little bit of research as well, combination of experience.
Is it difficult for you? Because obviously you have a passion for motorsport, you enjoy watching. Is it difficult to kind of turn the brain off and be able to enjoy a race rather than kind of almost be in work mode?
That's a good question. Something about Formula One always surprises me, though, doesn't it? Like, I mean, that's a great question. If you go back on my YouTube last week, I said if Lando gets pole position and Max starts second, here's what Lando needs to do. He needs to shoot across to the inside and defend turn one. Like I said, all that stuff. And so it's a good question you're asking that, because then I watched the race proper 1 week later, and everything I said that was happening happened, right? Or was going to happen, right? So everything I said Lando needed to do to win that race, he didn't do, which I was expecting him to do. So it's a good question. I still watch with interest. It's sport, so it's unpredictable at times. I mean, who would have thought Hamilton would crash on lap 5? Things happen. Obviously, Abu Dhabi 21 was something crazy which you could never predict. So it still keeps me on edge from an unpredictability standpoint, but I do my best to anticipate what will happen. Can I switch off fully? Not really, but I think that's part of the enjoyment, is watching the guys go through their technique, and can they deal with the challenges in front of them. And like when Lando got all those flags in Baku, he got a flashing white which then went out, and then a flashing yellow which then went green. Like that sort of thing, it's difficult to prepare for. So there are always situations which keeps me on my toes, which then I'll add into one of my programs, or I'll have to update something, or send a message out to my drivers on WhatsApp like, "Hey, did you see this? This is something we haven't seen before, so be careful of that."
So we know you came from an engineering background, but how was that transition made? How did you know driver coaching is where your interests truly lied?
You're asking fantastic questions. I haven't been asked this before. So these are great questions. So thank you. I'm enjoying this. Well, I wanted to have some sort of role, engineering role, put it that way, in motorsport. So I was looking at all of the options, and there was vehicle, like I listed before, vehicle dynamics, aerodynamics, strategy, mechatronics, electrical. Like there's a plethora of spots. So I joined the local Formula 3 team at that time, and we had two existing engineers there already. So Dave and Chris, and then myself. So I was the third one, and they were excellent. And like I can't I don't want to underestimate, and I can't begin to explain how good they were. They were across the roll centers, the dampening. They had all these Excel sheets to calculate the different loads on the tires, and I was thinking, Jesus, like, what am I doing here? I have so much to learn, but also questioning, like, is this what I want to do? Because it didn't really, that part didn't really grab me that much. So they were excellent. So Dave was particularly good with the chassis, and Chris was particularly good with the engine. So they had the whole car pretty much covered. So I was thinking, like, where can I add value here? So then I watched the first race. I watched one of the onboards from our drivers, and he wasn't using all of the track, for example, in a double apex finish to the lap. And then I sat down with him and said, hey, look, it'd be good if you could carry enough speed such that you're sweeping out naturally to use all of the track width, and that's going to keep the downforce active, and you're going to carry more speed through that final corner. That leads onto the main straight, blah, blah, blah. So we found time that way. But at the time, I didn't realize that for me, it was like, he's not using all the track, or this is something basic. So this is not something where I could make a career out of this. You know what I mean? So for me, that was just like, any driver would review their own onboard and have a look at something like that. So for me, it was something very elementary, but it was a long time until I reflected, like, oh, actually, people need this, and people can use this information, and I can help people in this way. So I went down initially a strategy engineering path. I came very close to a role with Red Bull, having developed my own race strategy simulation software. I felt like I said to you before, having watched some of the strategic things unfold, I thought I could add value there. So I went ahead and developed my own program. I went to teams and said, hey, look, I understand strategy really well. I've developed my own program. Here's what I can do, blah, blah, blah. So I came very close with Red Bull, but my fall down, or my limitation was that I couldn't code very well software to predict a model. But what I lacked there, I thought I made up for in racing IQ, which is a whole other topic in itself, that racer's instinct for when do you make a decision, right? So to give you an example, like we spoke about, that instinct of the Lando should have let Max through and continue to attack or tried thereafter. That was, you don't need to be a computer engineer to work that out, but that was what they were looking for at that time. And those are the people on the McLaren pit wall. Another example I can give you on the weekend was Tom Stallard, Lando's race engineer, comes to him and says, Lando, just look after the rears out of turn 1 and turn 8. The rear tires weren't the limitation on the weekend. It was all about the front tires. And Max started complaining, front tires, front tires. Charles and Franco were driving certain lines in order to look after the front tires. Lando, the reason he couldn't get close and attack Max was due to front tires. So there's little things like that where I'm sitting at home thinking, these guys can do the coding and computer side, but they can't do have the racing IQ side. Unfortunately, that's not recognized yet in the sport. Racing IQ, it's not really a thing at the moment. But if enough points and enough pain is felt and lost, then absolutely it will become a thing. So long story short, I ended up pursuing the driver coaching side because I thought that's where I could add the most value. So I do a lot of work with drivers. We have theory and practical sessions together on the sim, and there's nothing that I can't transfer across them. I feel like I'm driving through them, if that makes sense. I'm imparting techniques and information on them. So when I see them do well or compete for wins, it's like absolute joy for me. It fills my heart.
Said the driver coaching, that's where you feel you added value within a team. That's the kind of the gap in the market, so to say. Would you
Yeah.
say to engineers looking at where they kind of want to specialize that they need to figure out where they add value? Is that the advice you would give?
Yes, spend more time. And even if it's not a role, because driver coaching, if you go on any of the team's websites right now, there is no opening for a driver coach because they place so much importance, and probably too much importance, on the car. The car gets all of the attention, and the drivers drive the way they drive. Like, who's going to come in and tell Lewis Hamilton that he needs to drive in a certain way? Um, you could argue that, Max Verstappen, Lewis Hamilton, whilst they're excellent and some of the greatest of all time, I've seen some areas in which I could definitely just add value. Not in the long term. It would be sort of a 1 hour meeting where I would say, hey, I've seen this and you could clean this up, and that would be it. So I wouldn't need to spend much time with them, but every driver on the grid could could use a coach, not even sometimes to coach, but also to remind at times, like, hey, don't forget this. This is really important. Roger Federer is my childhood hero, and he was walking around at all times with three or four coaches. And it's Roger Federer, 20-time Grand Slam champion. He was the greatest of his era. Why? Because of the reminding piece. Because, hey, keep me on the straight and narrow. And if you see anything that I'm going down the wrong way, you're there immediately to pull me back in. So that is worth it. So he had mental coaches, physical coaches, technical coaches. Probably we should say Nico Rosberg was the only other one who really took it upon himself to say, okay, my talent can only get me so far. If I want to beat the greatest of all time in Lewis Hamilton, I need that extra help. Who can I talk to? Who do I need to go to? What do I need to learn? So the arrogance and had to really drop, and then he could absorb all of the information that came his way. That's unfortunately a rare case, but it's proof that if you do reach out for help, a world championship is waiting for you.
Now, let's go into more about what you're actually getting up to in your day to day life, what it actually means to be a driver coach. And we've mentioned, it is about improving lap times, but there are so many things which come into it, tire management, fuel management, race strategy. How do you teach that? Is it as simple as you sit down and you look at the data? How do you go about helping with that?
Uh, do you mean with regards to just race strategy or any other topic in
Well,
particular?
how do you teach someone how to manage their tires? How do you teach someone how to manage their fuels in a race? I'm not from a racing perspective, so I look at Formula One, and when they're saying manage your tires, I get it to an extent. Manage your fuel. I get it to an extent. I'm thinking, can I make it to Tesco and back with the fuel I have in my car? But how do you actually teach a racing driver how to do that? What is the importance of it?
Well, it's through explanation, demonstration, and the mechanics of how it works. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about fuel strategy, for example. So a lot of people watching will have no idea that there is even a fuel strategy. What is fuel strategy? You ask the common fan, they wouldn't even know. I don't even think a lot of the commentators even know. And I add in that category David Croft and Martin Brundle because I've heard them talking about fuel and they don't fully understand it. So let's say it's a 60 lap race. uh, there is a chance that you're not going to be running that race 100% flat out the whole race. You might get rain, you might get a yellow flag, and these are just very gentle examples. You might get some rain, you might get a yellow flag, you might get heavy rain in which you have to fully switch to the wet tires. You might get double yellows, but then you might get virtual safety cars or safety cars, or you might be in traffic where you can't pass the car in front because it's just impossible to pass. So you're going to be using less fuel than what you should be using. There will be a situation at some point in the race where you're not going flat out for whatever reason. So then do you fill the car up with 60 laps of fuel or do you put maybe 58 to start the race with, anticipating for that safety car? As it turned out in Austin, if you watched the race a few days ago, Lewis puts it in the wall, the safety car comes out. What does that mean? Well, for 3 or 4 laps, they're cruising around, not using much fuel. So it would be silly to put 60 laps worth of fuel in the car. You're going to finish the race with a surplus of fuel. You don't want to be carrying around any extra fuel than what you want to. So 60 lap race, you would start the race with 58 laps, anticipating for that safety car, that yellow flag, that virtual safety car, that rain, that traffic, anticipating for something that's going to bridge that gap, which means you don't carry around any more fuel than what you need. Now, in the unusual circumstance that doesn't happen, no safety car, no rain, no yellow flag, no double yellow flag, no nothing, then you need to do a little bit of manual fuel saving on your own. Now it is 100% full throttle race. You do need to bridge that gap somehow. So how do you save back those 2 laps of fuel without losing lap time? There's a way and a skill and a craft in order to do that. So does that make sense, Sydney? Do
Yeah.
you follow my logic on
Yeah.
that?
I'm gonna
Mm.
become an engineer now. I'm just going to get all of your skills and
It
I'm
makes
gonna be on the
sense,
pit
yeah?
bull. Yeah,
Yeah.
honestly, it does. And this is what you do, right? You have a YouTube channel, Level Up Time, and you put all of these concepts that we hear in commentary, we hear on a race weekend, and you simplify it. You put it in layman's terms. You help us to understand the engineering side. Can you tell us a bit more about your YouTube channel?
It's something I'm trying to grow as much as possible in order to get exposure and ultimately go where I want to go. Ultimately, where I want to go is that a Formula One team looks at me or finds me on YouTube or LinkedIn or on some social media and sees that I've pointed out something important, something technical, and says, "We need this guy. Like, get him in straight away." That would be my dream, and that's what I'm trying to do. So through my YouTube, I'm literally just trying to add as much value as possible. One of the things I spotted, which I posted this morning, I'm not sure if you saw it, was the difference in line between Franco Colapinto and Lando Norris and what it meant for tyre wear and what it meant for Lando as for why he couldn't attack Max and get fully alongside Max the way he wanted to. So everyone was looking down the back straight at the DRS. And I'm like, hang on, let's go back a few corners. What's happening there? Because that's where you need to look for the once those corners flow through, then the result is what you see down the straight, down the attack. So everyone's looking at the move and the defense and the incident and did he go off and hand the place back. But I'm like, if you had have done this a few corners earlier, it would have got you closer and it would have been an easier job when the time came. So it's little things like that. It's all in the details. You just need to have an eye for what's happening. So I talk about different lines, and in this particular case, in turn eight, I think he was taking too wide of a line and asking too much of the front tires. We spoke about the front tires again. And this is probably due to misinformation from the pit wall coming, hey, you need to look after your rears. If I was there, it would have been all about the fronts. So again, that's the difference. So too much front load due to the line. You've got the aero wash from Max Verstappen. That's all that dirty, turbulent air coming off that Red Bull that Lando has to drive through. If you can drive in a line that just offsets and gets you in and through that air. Obviously, you can't see it, but you can feel it. You need to know where that is. And that gets you closer to max. Bang, you can use the slipstream and the DRS and the battery and all your tools to do the job thereafter. But it was that change, that detail that I was looking for. Anyway, Franco was taking that line that I was looking for. So I thought I'd call that out and say, therefore, that Franco has something unique, something special, some sort of coaching or some idea of what to do that maybe Lando didn't have at that point in that time.
I'm curious, if I'm a driver, right? I'm in my kind of Formula 3, British Formula 3 stage of my career. I'm coming to you and I say, Martin, I need your help. My lap times, I'm not where I want to be. What is your process in kind of assessing me as a driver, kind of understanding where I'm potentially falling flat?
Yeah, great question again, Jesus. I go through basically I have a few questions that I'll ask them. One of the first ones is, what's a technical corner? You'd be surprised how that's such a simple question, but unfortunately doesn't often have an answer. So then I say, okay, well, here's where we're going to start. That gets most of them. But then it could be like we talked about with fuel saving, and I pick different topics from my programs. Fuel saving is in the professionals program. You wouldn't be doing that unless you're in F2, F1. Technical corners you have to deal with even in F4, F3. You're dealing with them constantly. So I'll pick a topic or I'll draw on the whiteboard a technical corner and a wet track, and I'll say, draw for me where the racing line. I'll ask them questions and I'll press up against the areas. I'll show them some telemetry and I'll say, what's the driver done wrong here with this piece of telemetry, just a random piece, and they'll have to pick. So I can test their understanding from the comfort of my home, which is excellent. And then based on the answers that come back to me, then I know, okay, he or she understands this, but we have work to do here. So then we go from there.
And you've mentioned there how great it is being able to do that from the comfort of your own home. But what are the challenges of working virtually with drivers?
The challenges working virtually is that when they get to the track, sometimes they forget what we spoke about. Everything kind of goes out the window at one point. So that's where, when we spoke about the coach being a reminder, also sometimes like there's teach and remind, and they're both just as important as each other. So being able to remind. So I always say to them, call me after every session. Like, I just want to check 5 minutes, check in. How did you go? What were some of the problems you had? here's the direction I think you should go, bang, and just try to keep them as straight as narrow. But that's the challenge. Sometimes they don't call, or they get caught up with social media stuff, or the team want them for some reason to go through something else, or there's all the other fluff around the sport that sometimes takes away from just the driving, unfortunately, and the lap time. They might have to go do an interview or whatever, a massage. It could be anything. So then there's all that to consider. Unfortunately, I would love to be trackside and dedicated to one driver, but unfortunately, money will dictate whether or not I get the chance to do that. The driver would need to take me around with them. So it would be a Formula One thing. The team would have to do it.
Do you think roles will open up like that soon? Someone is going to realize how important and how beneficial it can be to have someone like you just sat in the garage helping the driver out.
I think so, and I hope so. I think as the cars get closer and closer, what's going to make the difference? It's going to be the driver. Hopefully this year we've seen that. Hopefully this year it's been about, like, the McLaren has definitely been a championship worthy car. If you go back and look at all the opportunities that they've had, and the fact that they've been winning races since Miami, and some of the missed opportunities along the way, you talk about the Monzas, for example, or the Austrias, where Lando and Max came together in the details there. And you put all that, then the McLaren's been a championship winning car. The Red Bull's been a championship winning car, and so has the Ferrari, believe it or not. There's been winning since Melbourne, Monaco, fast. Like when in Singapore, when nothing was doing, lap 42, bang, Charles Leclerc fastest lap. And I'm like, where did that come from? That car is quick. And then it takes pole position in Baku. And then it wins now in Austin, and then it's got good tire life. And you start to look at it and think, maybe that car was a championship winning car, but the driver's headspace wasn't always like starting out like thinking we can win this championship. And it's understandable because the previous year Red Bull just dominated everything. So everyone's like, well, Red Bull are just going to dominate again. So it's really about just coming into the season, resetting, saying, I got to go through 24 races and collect as many points as possible and damage limitation every single race. That has to be the mindset from the outset. I think if it was, then maybe you would see a different result. But I think McLaren just only realized that they could potentially win the championship halfway through it. It's a bit late at that point. So as the cars get closer and closer, which hopefully will certainly happen next year because it's the final run of these regs, then the driver coaching and driver mentoring is hopefully going to play a more important role. And as more and more rookies come in as well, you saw Colapintos, your Bearmans, um, Liam Lawson, all these guys start coming in, Antonelli. And there was a 2-week period where Antonelli crashed in the Parabolica in Monza, Colapinto crashed in the wall FP1 in Baku, and Behrman crashed FP3 in the wall in Baku. All three of them put it in the wall in a practice session, and it was clear to me that none of them had a driver coach in their corner, in their ear, to prevent those sort of things from happening. So with rookies coming in and with cars coming closer, it's very important.
You've mentioned as well that it's not just about technique and getting a driver to kind of be fast. There is also a mental aspect of it. So if you take a look at Lewis Hamilton from, the end of the 2021 season onwards, he very much so lost his mojo. He didn't seem
Mm,
like the Lewis Hamilton we all know, the championship winning Hamilton. He wasn't getting wins, he wasn't getting podiums, so he just kind of was deflated. How
mm.
do you go about motivating a driver who's just pretty much on a losing streak?
Yeah, this is a good question. You're 100% right, because when he won Silverstone, I think it was this year, he started crying. So you could see how much it meant to him. And 100%, you're 100% bang on. I think Abu Dhabi 21 cut deeper than any of us could see, probably to Lewis. And, he's got to rebuild that belief. I think one of the things with Lewis is that he gives Max too much respect. And he said this in press conferences. They say, do you give Max extra room? And he goes, of course I give Max extra room. He's Max Verstappen. He always is unpredictable when I give him extra room. And I look at that and say, Lewis, that's a weakness because nobody deserves extra room. Whether you're Max Verstappen, Charles Leclerc, Fernando Alonso, you're Lewis Hamilton. Why should you be giving extra room and treating them differently? You need to walk in with your shoulders high. You're the 7-time world champion. You're nearly the greatest of all time. No one deserves extra room, particularly not Max Verstappen. Thank you very much. It's you after me. So that's the sort of like thing I would be coaching into Lewis to say, like, trust yourself, like back yourself more. Like it's surprising that sometimes the self-doubt is there even when he's won everything there is to win. Like it similar to Lando in a way. Like he keeps saying, "Oh, I don't want the team's help because I want to win it naturally and organically, and I don't need Oscar's help, and that would be unfair." Or, and I said, Lando, you've put yourself in a championship winning position because you've deserved and earned the right to be there because you've got the most points over the most amount of time. So you should be saying, these guys need to get behind me and help me. That's one way of looking at it. So it's those things in what the guys are thinking, what their mentality is coming into the weekend. Max doesn't need help in this area. Max has always come in with an enormous amount of self confidence and self belief and self assurance. So he doesn't need help in that area, but Max is very emotional. So if you look at Hungary this year, when things weren't going his way, the emotions come out and he made the mistake of a really weird random dive bomb in Lewis and the car flipped and he lost a lot of points and the strategy didn't go his way. And when things don't go his way, instead of just collecting fourth, he'll be like, "Well, I don't care if I get eighth, it doesn't matter." Like it doesn't matter. He writes off the whole race as just he draws a line through the whole thing. So Max has got self-confidence and self-assurance and self-belief, but he's very emotional, much more than Oscar Piastri, for example, who's very stoic. So they've all got their pros and cons, but that's hopefully I answered your question with some examples.
I'd love to talk a bit about what you mentioned about Max towards the beginning of your answer then, because I was having this exact conversation with my dad the other day. It's that
Yeah.
everyone on the grid, Max has managed to build this persona, this character that if you challenge him, you won't be able to get past because if you don't, he'll just push you off, right? That's kind of
Mm.
what he's built around him. Would you agree with that? That drivers almost fear battling Max and will give him too much room because they don't want to go off?
Max will only assert himself in that way when he's in front in the championship. So in this particular case, Max is leading, Lando's second, and you see them fight on track. Well, what do you expect to happen? Because if both the cars have three wheels on them, well, that works in Max's favor. So it's on you then to get into a position where you can control and command the respect either through points or through track position or something else and make Max take the cautious approach. Like it's very easy to look at it and say like he's in the lead of the championship. So like I said before, he can afford to brush and it not worry because that's one less race that Lando's going to have then to make up points. So if it was roles reversed, he would maybe be less assertive, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
So I'm not sure I answered your question. Do you mind just repeating it to me just so I can give you another thought?
It's do you think that drivers almost fear battling with Max on track, that they will always kind of give him that extra space because it's Max Verstappen?
Yes, they do, but I'm not sure that he deserves that. Like I said with the Lewis answer, why would you? That then feeds into his. Ayrton Senna had this as well. Like whenever he showed you a wheel, you would jump out of the way. Like if you can hold your ground and show that yes, you're Max, you're great, but you don't deserve any more respect than anyone else. Max will eventually clock that and eventually realize, okay, with these guys, they get out of the way, but with this guy, I need to check, like he'll work it out. Max is not silly. So um, there's no need to show him any more respect than anyone else. In fact, that works against you and that works in Max's favor if you do that, because then he'll double down on that. He'll press further.
Got another thing now that you make me think of that I need to just
Yeah.
get your take on, and it's that so everyone knows that the FIA haven't been very consistent lately with
Mm.
penalising drivers for what they do, and a lot of the time Max Verstappen gets the brunt of it, right? Everyone's like, "Oh, Max Verstappen gets away with anything. He can do whatever he wants. No one cares." And
Yeah.
I'm always in defense and I'm like, "He's a racing driver. If there's a grey area, he's gonna be all up in it." It's the same with the team. If they can get away with putting something on their car, if there's a loophole, they're going to jump right
Mm.
through it. Would you agree that that just makes Max Verstappen a better racing driver because he's okay going in the grey areas?
Yeah, but again, most of the time he's in the lead, or you have to pass him. It's this what I'm always saying. He's always got the upper hand slightly in terms of he's like in this particular example, he was in front of Lando, he was on the inside, he was totally controlling the corner. Like it's on Lando then to do something creative to then pull it out from underneath Max. So yes, Max is always pressing up against that limit, but he's always got some sort of advantage in his favor. I speak about Abu Dhabi 21 all the time, and I say Max would have won in both situations because there's always an advantage which Max can pull. So if Max is second, like he was, Max was second on the soft tire, then those are Max's advantages. He's in P2 on a brand new set of soft compound tires. That was his advantage in Abu Dhabi 21. But if you gave him Lewis's position, there's a few things that you need to hand over to Max. Ability to control the restart, 1 lap to go, no DRS on the first lap of a safety car. You've got to hand him all these other advantages. And because Max's racecraft's so good, he actually wins and converts in any situation, in my opinion, because it wasn't an assessment in anything other than racecraft. So you're either going to hand him the soft tire and 1 lap to go, or you're going to hand him ability to control the restart, 1 lap to go, no DRS, and the faster car. You've got to hand him that as well. So he's always got an advantage in which he will maximize and play with and play for. So he's just pulling at all of the tools and things that he has to demonstrate and show off his racecraft. And if you're going to go out around the outside, I'll do this. If you're going to go up the inside, well, then I'll do this. So he's always got like an answer for it. So you just have to be more creative, and probably unpredictable would be the other thing as well. Like in the Lando example, maybe he could have dummied him. We spoke about potentially doing something different in turn 8 in order to get a bit closer, the way you manage your battery. Yeah, you need to sit down and look at the track map probably before the race and plan out how this is going to work exactly. But there's always a car width up the inside. And I would probably encourage Lando, if you're going to go for it and go around the outside, you might as well go up the inside and crash. Like, I'd hate to say it, but I mean, what's the difference at this point? You're going to lose points left or right. So you might as well take your chances up the inside.
And my last question on real life examples we've had in Formula One lately is Lando Norris has obviously been in a position where he's managed to get pole positions this season. And unfortunately, he's not really been able to convert that into leading the actual race. Let's
Mm.
say you're his driver coach, you're in his corner. How are you combating this issue? What kind of advice are you giving to him to improve on these race starts?
Yeah, so unfortunately, a lot of the focus on race starts is reaction time. And that's probably the biggest waste of time and area that you could look in, because reaction time, yes, it's a part of the start, but it's not everything. Reaction time is the one for Instagram where you're pushing the buttons and everything looks like you're a superstar, right? And that's the one that gets the most attention. As it turns out, in Netherlands, both of them had the same reaction time, but Max just drove clean past him into turn one. I think that both their reaction times was 0.26 or 0.28. I can't remember. It was one of those two. Because there's a lot of things that feed into the start. So what have you got? So you've got tire temperatures, tire compound. You start on the softs or mediums or hards. Which side of the track you're on? You're on the inside, the dirty side, the outside, the clean side. How many revs you put down, how you release the throttle, release the clutch, your throttle mapping, your clutch mapping. That is how these items get engaged. And then your reaction time as well. So there's all these things around it, and you need to find those perfect positions on those items, like perfect tire temperatures, and making sure your box is clean and practicing your starts and the right revs and all that jazz. And then if you're Lando and you're on pole, you've just got to shoot across and cover the inside as soon as possible. So when Max goes forward into that space, you're there already. He has no choice but to go around the outside. So you've got to ask him the question, are you going to go around the outside of me or not? Because unfortunately, Max always finds a way to sneak up the inside, doesn't he? So you've got to make sure that that door is closed, because if you give Max an inch, he will take a mile. So the solution is don't give him that inch. So there's those things, right? You just need to be mindful. But Lando's lost the lead due to a few different reasons, and that's the thing. Every race, it's something different. This one, it was the clutch. This one, it was Max got up the inside. This one, it was tire temperatures. It's always something. So More work just has to be done. The harder you work, the luckier you get.
Do you think it's also a pressure thing? He's finally got a championship in shot. It's kind of a win is within reach. Do you think it's a pressure thing of being at the front and then kind of almost, you said it before, forgetting the advice that you've been given?
Yes, yes, it's a pressure thing. Where they're athletes performing at the highest level on the world stage with millions of people breathing down their neck at the grandstands, and then you've got people like me on YouTube saying, if you had have done this and this, you've got extra pressure from everyone. Of course, there's pressure, but it's part of your job as an athlete is to withstand pressure. It's no different to match point. You know what I mean in tennis, or like it's just part of your job. So yes, there is additional pressure. He might need to lose a championship before he wins one. Sometimes you need to like Nico Rosberg, he had to lose 14 and 15 before he said, you know what, like I've won races and everything, I'm happy, but I'm ready now to sacrifice for a championship, because that's what it's about. When drivers come to me, I ask them three questions: what do you want? How badly do you want it? And how much are you willing to suffer for it? Because that's the key part, and it involves an element of sacrifice. You might not get to see your family for a year. You might not get to eat the foods you want to eat. You might not get to race with your friends on the sim, or so some things need to be chopped, right? For you to fully turn over all the stones that you need to turn. So he might need to just go through that process. He's still 24. He's still very young. We put a lot of pressure on him, but when I was 24, I was, I was an idiot compared to what he's doing now. So I have great respect for him and his lap time. He might just need a bit of time before he works it out and says, winning races has been great, but I'm ready now. I'm ready for a championship.
And in your opinion, what kind of driver skills are essential to be a championship winning driver? What do you need to have 100% you were amazing at? What skills are we talking?
There's this kind of magic where you can deal with any situation that is thrown your way, because sport is unpredictable, but it always seems to be the case that the champions always find a way and the best drivers always find a way. We spoke about this in Abu Dhabi 21. Like, you give Max the soft tire and P2, he wins. You give him ability to control the restart and one lap to go and no DRS, he wins, because champions find a way. So it doesn't matter what they're dealt with. So it's that ability to be dynamic and be flexible and be adaptive and be creative and find creative solutions when you're presented with different problems, right? Uh, Recall Baku 2016 when Nico and Lewis, they had that issue. I'm not sure if you remember, with the engine, and it was went into a certain mode. And then at that time, team information or team radio was not allowed. So the drivers had to work it out themselves. So they signed up for a motor race and they got given an assessment in how to reset their engine. As it turns out, Nico was the one that worked that out, and he went on to get the better results. And Lewis had a bad day because he couldn't work that out. So you never know what you're going to be presented with. It's that ability to just problem solve on the fly and find a way when it seems like there is no way.
And racing technique, it's obviously something which is developed throughout experience. We obviously see a lot of drivers who come from racing families as well. Max Verstappen, his dad was a racing driver.
Mm.
Nico Rosberg, dad was a champion. We see a lot of that happening in motorsport. So, do you think being a good racing driver is something you're kind of just born with? Like, it can be taught to an extent, but you have to have something to be a champion.
Great question again. Yes, yes, and no. It's both. Genetics deals the cards, environment plays the hand. So, you can be dealt the best cards in the world, but if you're not committed and not focused and distracted or not as professional as you should be, then you're going to fail. Conversely, if you haven't been dealt the best natural talent, like we discussed with Nico Rosberg versus Lewis Hamilton, but you work your backside off and you turn over every single stone you need to turn over, and you're as professional and as dedicated as you can be, you can find success that way. The magic happens when you have both. when you have a Michael Schumacher who or an Ayrton Senna who have talent and work their backside off, and then multiple championships come your way. So yes, it's something you can be born with, of course, an innate feel for the grip of the car, but it's definitely not something that you can't learn or can't develop or can't improve with the right work ethic, right mentality, and right help as well.
So basically, what you're telling me is that it's not too late for me to become a very, very successful Formula One driver. That's what I'm going to take away from that.
It's not too late. Some of my programs are 6 or 7 weeks. So you'd be amazed how far you could go in that time if you had a simulator set up and we did some work together. It's not too late.
I want to talk about how someone can get to do what you get to do. So, for someone looking to become a driver coach, they think that's something they're interested in. What skills, what qualifications do you think would benefit someone looking to get into that role?
It's not easy. It's not straightforward. You really need to be able to have an answer for everything that's happening out there based on significant experience. It'd be very unusual to see a 18-year-old driver coach who hasn't seen or doesn't have the answers. I really feel like it's something that comes with time. Rob Wilson is one of the great driver coaches, and he's, I don't want to say how old he is, but he's next generation old. And some of the things he teaches are absolutely true and relevant and still hold true today. They're more vehicle dynamics principles, but now things have moved on and there's more that you need to worry about. There's crazy amounts of downforce and all these buttons on the wheel that we spoke about, and ability to control the engine braking and the differential and the battery, things that Rob didn't have at that time, or fuel strategy, which wasn't a thing back then, which we spoke about on this show already. So you need to just, it comes with time. And I'd say it's not something that you would have to rush into. You need to do a lot of research as well. And probably the best way would be to align yourself with an existing driver coach and have them teach you what they know and then go up that way.
Knowing how to make a racing driver better is one thing, and teaching is a whole other thing as well. You've got to
True.
have bucket loads of patience. I couldn't work with kids because I don't have any of that. Teaching is a skill in itself. How have you managed to become a good teacher? Where have you learnt those skills?
True, very true. I guess when someone explains something to me, I wish they explained it in a way that was just clear, that just cut out the fluff and just so I could understand what I need to understand. So I need to have a great amount of empathy for the person, sometimes the young boy or girl that I'm coaching, who could be 16, 17. They might not have the understanding that I have. So I need to break it down to them and like build on principles. So a lot of my coaching is about principles, like what is downforce and how does it work? So, as the car goes through the air, then downforce gets generated. So something that builds with speed. So then when it's fully active at 300 kilometers, you're going to drive in this way. And when it's not active and you're driving through a hairpin, like Japanese hairpin or Chinese hairpin, and downforce is not active, it's at 60 kilometers per hour. Well, you need to understand that and drive in this way. It's just about like the principles, I think, is the most important thing. Once people understand the principles, like how to use the tools, then you can be creative. It's like picking up any set of tools that, like how to change a tire or a hammer or something. This is what it does and how it's used, but you could use it then in any creative way once you know how to hold it or how to use it or how to sharpen it. Or so I try to teach principles and communicate in a way that I would like to be spoken to so that it makes sense for me. Hopefully, it makes sense to someone else as well.
And what's the end goal for you? When will you be fully satisfied with where you're at in life, with your career aspect?
Like I said before, I'd like for a team to say, okay, fantastically knowledgeable person, which we could obviously use given, the past few races that we've seen McLaren, Ferrari, Red Bull go through, someone that could support a rookie like we spoke about coming in, or the likes of Franco or Kimi Antonelli. I think it's fantastic that you bring these kids in and give them an opportunity, but you've got to bring the brains, you've got to bring the mentor, you've got to bring the experience with them, you've got to bring someone that with them that has to nurture that talent as well. So I would hope that someone would see that and then give an opportunity that way. And the end goal, you'd see me on the grid working with someone like Franco, for example. That would be a dream.
Amazing. Well, we've got our fingers crossed for you.
Fingers crossed.
And to round up our time together today, Martin, what advice would you give to people listening who have heard all of what you've just said and been like, yes, that is for me. I want to be this guy. What advice would you give to those people?
So, like someone that wants to be a driver coach?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, like I said, you would have to reach out to an existing driver coach and try to mirror them and have them as your mentor and learn from them. So reach out to me, reach out to other driver coaches, and put forward your case as to why we should work together. And then, obviously you've got to put effort in yourself. Like when I was going for the strategy engineering role, I developed my own race strategy simulation software. So here's what I've developed. Here's me as a package rather than, oh, hey, that sounds interesting. I'd like to work with you. You also have to do the hard work, like we spoke about. So you've got to increase your chances of being seen or being accepted by doing the work yourself as well. So reach out to as many people as you can, including myself, and get in touch and try to learn and be a sponge. And yeah, like I say, but be a sponge. Don't come in with any arrogance. Always come in with the humility that there's always a better way, or always another way, or always a different way to take a corner, or maybe, hey Martin, I love your work, but here's something you haven't considered or haven't seen, like get me thinking as well. So then it's like it's a little bit engaging as well. So that would be my advice would be to, yeah, align yourself with someone, have them as your mentor, and bring something to the table that challenges or is innovative as well.
And we know you're smashing it on social media at the minute. So where can people go to find your content?
Yeah, so at the moment, a lot of content is coming out on my YouTube, lower lap time. Or on all the socials, it's lower lap time. People can email me. I have emails come in regularly, people asking for help, martin@lowerlaptime.com. I'm happy to write you an email back. Um, and to work with me as well, you can inquire through martin@lowerlaptime.com.
Well, Martin, thank you so much for coming on, sharing some wisdom, kind of getting the brains going with the engineering stuff. It's been great chatting with you. Thank you so much for joining.
No, thank you for having me. Like I said, been asked questions that I wasn't prepared for, which is like we discussed, right? So thank you so much. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
And thanks to everyone who's tuned in and given it a listen. Make sure you go check out Martin on the socials and, of course, us too at Sector 1 Motorsport. We'll be back next week with another career talk. Goodbye.